in-law was manic depressive, also called bipolar, and sadly he took his own life a few years ago. And when I look at this situation in terms of politics, what I think we need to recognize is that folks with mental health and addiction issues are a marginalized population. And as we know from the civil rights battle and the human rights battle, that what needs to happen is that if you're a marginalized population, you can't, like if you're a woman, you can't wait for the patriarchy to solve the problems of patriarchy. You're going to have to step up your game and step out yourself the same way African Americans took to the streets in protest, and the same way that gay folks learned they had to come out, even though it was dangerous. And so I think what needs to happen with the mental health and addiction issue is that people who are friends and family members need to come out and do as I'm doing right now and just announcing, like, I have a family member who has this problem. And we need to be playing a role in lobbying elected officials in our democracy and going to the budget hearings and going to the committee meetings and saying, I'm representing a family member or a friend who has mental health and addiction issues, and we need to up our game in treating folks a lot better. So that'll be the kind of thing I'll be talking about tomorrow night at the library, is helping people understand how to make a stronger democracy, how to deal with capitalism and socialism in a constructive way, and to really understand what they are and where the benefits and where the problems are on all three of those topics. So that's kind of, just want to give you a little gist of what I'll be talking about tomorrow night.
That sounds great, and I appreciate you. And definitely stay on the line, Frank, for a second. But Lindsay, he actually brings up, Dr. Roy brings up an interesting point, which is I imagine that there are still a lot of very negative stereotypes about women in medicine, and you're a leading woman in medicine. So I imagine that you probably have to fight these kind of things on a regular basis, because when I think of particularly the big hospitals, it's still very much of a male-dominated field.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly gender bias in every field, and medicine and healthcare is no exception. And yeah, I mean, me and most of my female colleagues can share, I'm sure, several stories of their experiences. But, you know, the way I kind of navigate these waters is that I stick to all of the training that I've been lucky to get, and I stick up for my patients. I stand up for my patients, and I stand up for what I believe. And I do so as best I can in a very professional and firm manner. And for the most part, you know, it's people listen. People will listen to that. And sure, there are times when it doesn't work out, but you can't just give up. You simply can't. And as the previous caller just said, you know, he was referring to marginalized populations. I mean, I have a mission, and my mission far exceeds that of pettiness, of bias, which is just it's you know, we all encounter difficult circumstances. We have to rise above that, and that's what I just try to do. And I fully agree with the previous gentleman about marginalized populations and really empowering families to speak up. I do this all the time. I empower my patients and by extension their family, their support systems, because if we don't have a supportive community, whether that be your family, it could be your librarian, it could be your local police department, hospital, you know, we don't have a community that's supportive, then we as individuals will never improve. And our society, we're all made up of individuals, right? So I think we just always need to support one another.
Definitely. Just out of curiosity, because I'm reading one of your other articles, and I've heard this term used before, but what do you mean when you talk about radical listening? Because I read one of your past articles was about you went to a retreat on radical listening, and it seems to me that we probably need more radical listening if it's what I think it is. But what do you mean by radical listening?
Yeah, and that's actually not my term. That was that workshop was really started by the Columbia Division of Narrative Medicine, and I was fortunate enough to be invited by them to be one of the faculty leading this workshop. And really, I think the full title of the workshop was "Radical Listening in a Polarized World," or something to that effect. And one of the many lessons that were taught during this workshop is, things that are going to come across as pretty common sense. But as I learned both at Tulane and at Duke from my mentors, common sense isn't always that common. And so, one of the lessons we learn in radical listening is just listening without judgment and just listening in a very active manner. Remember, listening is not a passive exercise. In order to do it well, it means really engaging with that person across you and, making eye contact, it's your body language. It's, keeping your baggage and your biases, in check. And because it's not about you, it's about the other person. And really, just open communication really essentially starts with listening, and that's it goes all from there. Because if we don't listen, that's how we make misconceptions and draw all the wrong conclusions about one another.
And both Dr. Al as well as Humphrey, isn't that sometimes what goes wrong with our police officers? Because sometimes I think that when I've seen, particularly our youth, having conversations with the police officers, it seems like both parties are already going in with preconceived notions. So they're already got, both are up in arms before they've actually had a conversation with each other. So I was wondering if you have found that to be the case as well, and how you actually even not just the community, but also get the police to engage the community and not feel like that they are being the targets of the attack.
Yes, I agree 100%. I see that all the time. Both sides already have their minds made up, and it makes it very difficult to communicate that way. Both sides need to just be open. You need to go to the table again. If you've tried it before and it didn't work, try it again, and continue to try it until you get through. But the important thing is to go in with an open mind. The police officers do get training on socialization and how to deal with the different cultures and racial groups that they have to come in contact with. So they have the training. They just have to put it to use. Our community members just need to understand that every person is an individual, and if you had a bad situation or if a family member had a bad situation with an officer in the past, that may not be the case with every officer. So each instance is a new instance. It needs to go in open.
Yes, right. I can definitely see that. Go ahead, Humphrey.
Yeah, I definitely agree with law enforcement officers. Emotions are already high with a particular situation or a call that officer is going to. So those de-escalation techniques and those techniques that will impact that situation is vital in determining, the outcome. So de-escalation as well as understanding, that particular situation from a law enforcement standpoint as well as a citizen standpoint, I think it is critical. I think it's a partnership with both entities, law enforcement as well as citizens, and definitely channeling those emotions. And it's not an easy thing to do. I could tell you firsthand, as an officer, when you come up on a situation, tension is high, things has happened, and it takes a while for a person to kind of calm down and de-escalate. And I think that's why it's very important for training and officers to receive that training and recognizing that and making sure everyone is safe in those areas.
And Dr. Roy, this is another question that just occurred to me that I'm just curious about. A lot of times people, when they talk, and I know officers oftentimes are probably taught this as well, when they run across folks that are having different addictions, whether that's a drug addiction, whether that's an alcohol addiction or whatever, they are often told to get them into those 12-step programs. But then I've heard recently that people are not as sure as to whether the 12-step programs are actually as effective as they can be. So I was just wondering, from your standpoint, are the 12-step programs the best kind of programs to get folks into? Or are there other kind of programs that are better suited to what folks are going through? Or does it vary from person to person?
Yeah, so not only does it vary person to person, but it also varies geographically. Not all cities and counties and states have all the resources that they need, unfortunately, to get people with addiction the care that they need. So, look, in an ideal situation, when, say, a police officer find somebody who, say, dozing off or sleeping on the bench and because they're intoxicated, the key thing is not to throw them in jail, but rather just take them to the hospital, take them to emergency department, make sure that they, didn't suffer from head trauma, they don't have liver disease, they don't have some other hematologic or other medical urgent matter that needs to be addressed. Just get them to a hospital, and the hospital hopefully will have good resources in terms of connecting people to care, and hopefully that's not just giving them a piece of paper with a list of clinics or rehabs. That traditionally that's been the approach, and unfortunately, a lot of areas where there's just a real scarcity of resources, that's still what happens. But that's what I would do. But then there are other areas where there are 24/7 detox facilities, rehab clinics, and if you live in a city that has those services, then by all means utilize them. But when in doubt, just take the person to the hospital, and hopefully the hospital will have better resources. Maybe that patient needs to be admitted to the general medical wards or even the ICU. I've seen patients with addiction at all levels of care: outpatient clinic, outpatient detox, inpatient hospital, ICU, medical ICU, surgical ICU. You just don't know, and police officers, you can't blame them. They have no idea, right? They don't have that specialized medical training. So when in doubt, just send the person to a higher level of medical care.
So the other thing I was curious about is I remember back in the days they used to be, and this comes back to the mental illness stuff, you would hear about people that would commit relatives of theirs into the mental health wards or into the mental health clinics and everything. I don't know if that's still the case, but I do know that there historically were some famous jazz performers, because I'm a big music fan, that they got committed by family members because they were going through whatever they were going through, whether that was a mental illness or a drug addiction or maybe a combination thereof. But is that something that folks still are able to do, and is that something that you recommend that folks do, or do you think that they should just refer them to the medical people and let them put them into the psychological units if they have to go to a psychological unit?
Is that question for me, Mark?
Yes, it is, Dr. Wood.
So, yeah, it's. That's difficult. Look, a family isn't necessarily qualified either. That said, they know their family member, their loved one, better than you or me or a police officer. So, it comes down to really is safety, right? It ultimately comes down to health, well-being, and safety. So, if that individual is say behaving in a way that's delusional or aggressive, or that seems to be unsafe, then the family members need to do whatever they need to do to keep both the individual safe and themselves and the people around them. So if that means calling 911, then do that. If it means taking them to the hospital, then do that. Ultimately, that's always my ultimate concern. It's the individual and surrounding safety.
And to the two law enforcement, have y'all had incidences where you've had to deal with that, and if so, how did you handle those incidents?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
You go ahead, Doctor.
Okay. I have had to deal with incidents where individuals had to be hospitalized. As far as the family getting involved, as the other doctor said, it is usually a safety issue. And you'd be surprised. Well, you probably wouldn't be surprised, but when you reach the state where the family wants someone committed, believe me, they have given it a lot of time. They have given many, many, many chances for the situation to correct itself or just stabilize, and they are usually at their wits' end when they make these type of suggestions. So again, as law enforcement, your job is to just refer to a higher medical authority at that point, because again, you don't have the training that is needed to make the evaluation, but you do have the resources to refer it.
Excellent point about the family being at their wits' end. They're calling 911 for a